Howdy. For today's distance learning lesson, I'm getting tired of these distance learning lessons. I wish I was in the classroom with you guys. But this is just a quick lesson today to take a look at the end of the Cold War. This entire semester, we started back in January with the Cold War. We talked about McCarthyism. We played Find the Commie, great game. We watched The Majestic. We talked about the Korean War. We talked about Vietnam. And the whole backdrop of this semester has been the Cold War, the conflict between us and the communists, USSR versus the USA. Well, today we're going to talk about how that's kind of ended. And at the end of the lesson, we'll see if there's really remnants of it or there's any connections. Today, I won't be. Anyhow, let's just jump into it. The end of an era, the fall of the USSR. Okay. When we talked about the 1950s, you had Stalin. After Stalin dies, Nikita Khrushchev takes over Russia, and USSR, and then you're going to have other leaders in there. But after Khrushchev, most of the leaders tended to be older, Brezhnev and Dropov and all, and none of them really dynamic. And the system in USSR started to collapse because basically the fault of communism always has been, why should I work harder if I'm not making more? Capitalism, the harder you work, the more chances you take, the more money you make. Well, under communism, when the government controls the economy, what's your incentive? What are you doing that makes your life better? And eventually, communism just started to really stagnate. You add to that under Ronald Reagan, when we start developing our military in the 1980s, like when I was in the military, that's when the U.S. military gets rebuilt after Vietnam under Reagan. And Reagan comes up with things like Star Wars, the SDI, which we really didn't have, but the Russians didn't know that, and they spent a ton of money. And eventually, it building up the military collapses their economy. Into the picture for Russia comes a new leader and a new type of leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev, when I say younger leader and you look at the picture, you all are going, what are you talking about? But relatively younger for like Russia. Anyhow, Gorbachev came in and Gorbachev had new ideas. He said, we've got to open this up a little bit. His two big ideas, glasnost and perestroika. Perestroika we'll go to first. Perestroika is, the economy is not working. Look at the line here. Back in Russia, there's stories about people getting in line, not even knowing what they're trying to buy, but knowing there's something to buy, so you get in the line. There's stories about people selling broken light bulbs because of you could take that light bulb to work, unscrew a light bulb there and change it. Now, I don't believe those stories. I think they're kind of apocryphal, but it kind of it illustrates the problem in the Russian economy. They don't have a lot of good consumer goods, And you know what? They know what genes are. They just want them. Perestroika would be, how can we fix the economy without changing it? But what it does is it opens up just a little bit. So under perestroika, if you've got like a farmer's, you could grow something in a little plot extra and you could sell it to people. Hey, that gives more products for people to buy and it gives you a little bit extra money. So it's basically like trying to open up your economy a little bit. But once you open that door, it's kind of hard to shut that door. Perestroika was supposed to basically help consumers and take a little pressure off the government of unrest by having more things to buy, but really it kind of shows them more what they want and what they don't have. His other policy of glasnost is openness, where you can actually now start talking about some of the problems. Hopefully, if people complain a little bit more, they'll blow off steam and they'll trust their government more. It doesn't work like that. Once people are able to start complaining and protesting, then they start realizing everyone else is unhappy and get a choice. It basically makes people even madder. But these two concepts, for at the time, were very revolutionary for Russia. And Gorbachev is this new type of leader that allows that. Remember, under Stalin, he had the gulags, send you and your entire family away to a work camp out in Siberia. Gorbachev, okay, let's modernize, but we're still going to control. But the problem is, and parents will tell you this, once you give kids a little liberty, it's A, hard to take it back, and B, hard to control what more they want. Okay. Now, Ronald Reagan is one of those presidents that's a great communicator. He's a great speech writer. Gives great speeches. Has good phrases and stuff. But he's a symbol. Now, if you look at this picture, the first one, Ronald Reagan goes to Berlin. He goes to the Berlin Wall. And he actually says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. What are you afraid of? Why'd you build this wall up? The wall is not to keep us out, it's to keep your people in, basically. So tear down this wall. And what what he's saying is, now at the same time he's saying that, look what he also said. When he came in, he flat out calls Russia the evil empire, because Russia would come in and take countries over, like Afghanistan, and then they would not do good things to the people there. They came in heavy-handed. And if you think about Russia's thing, in the 50s, they come into Hungary and repress them, they crush them. Czechoslovakia in the 60s, they come in, they crush them. So he's saying, hey, but at the same time he's being tough and rebuilding the military, he also reaches out, and you know what? He meets Gorbachev. And if you look at the picture on the right, look at this. When they met, Reagan was very personable. Even him and Tip O'Neill, the Democratic leader, could talk and get along. In America today, that doesn't happen so much. We're so politicized and split. But Reagan could argue with you, he could discuss with you, but then he could also listen to you and talk. And when Reagan meets Gorbachev, there is kind of a chemistry there. Reagan has talked tough against Russia, but you know what? He's willing to talk and joke, and Russia finds a person they think they can deal with. And so they sign a basic arms treaty. We don't need nuclear arms to kill everybody more than one time. And if you've got an ability to kill everybody in someone else's country 2.1 times, that's just too much nuclear weapons. It's too much money that you're spending on that and not other stuff. So an arms treaty is a chance to back off. Once Reagan starts talking with Gorbachev, they have a connection. Heck, Reagan's wife and Gorbachev's wife have a connection. Well, during this time, in the 80s, the late 80s, there's starting to be a whiff of people in Eastern Europe. They're starting to say, hey, what about us? And really, where you really see it is in Poland. And Poland is really important. If you look on the left, under the solidarity, that's what that means in Polish, solidarity, it's a union. This guy right there, and I'm going to butcher his name, and I apologize profusely because he's an important person in history, but Lech Walesa, it was an electrician at a shipyard. And basically, he led a union, and for the first time, they start standing up and saying, hey, this is what we want. This is what's right. Now, Poland is a very unique country. Today, they're an ally of the United States, but Poland is a very unique country. It has a very Catholic population. Under communism, they basically tried to control religion. Under Lenin, he said, religion is basically an opiate to the masses. We don't want it. But Poland is Catholic, and a Polish Catholic becomes the Pope. And this changes things a lot, because in Poland, it's a little different. And where he stands up, the people start, standing up too. And when the Polish government doesn't crush them, like in Hungary in the 50s, in Czechoslovakia in the 60s, people start thinking, hey, maybe there's hope for us. And this whiff of rebellion starts spreading. And remember, under Gorbachev, with that glassness, that openness, where you could complain some without fear, this is going to be, an opening. And this is where it happens. It happens in Poland first. Now, in Poland, when they're not crushed, it spreads to neighboring East Germany. The Berlin Wall had cut Berlin in half. One side, communist, the other, capitalist, and the capitalist part really exploded and grew. I mean, West Berlin became a big economic hotspot for Germany, for West Germany. Eastern Berlin was just never as really developed as much. And so once people get a chance to complain, okay, Poland, the communist government, doesn't show that goes stomp on this every little bit, and people start complaining, it moves to Germany, and people start protesting in Germany. And when all of a sudden it collapses and the East German government says, okay, you know what, if you'd like to have a little bit of freedom, oh, baby, it goes quickly. And people start climbing the Berlin Wall. Before this, you climbed the wall, you got shot. It's the wall of death. But once that border opens up, and then in Hungary and in other areas, the border gets open and people can go from west to east, all of a sudden there's like a huge celebration. One of the links I want you to look at is going to be celebrating when the wall comes down. And it was like the party of all parties in Berlin, when people from East Berlin and West Berlin could climb the wall, talk with each other, share a drink, talk, and it opens up. And that's it. Because you know what? You can't keep people down. You can't kill everybody. You can't repress everybody in that spirit. And when people start seeing that freedom of what was in the West, that's it for the end is done. And Gorbachev is not going to send in the Russian army like they did in the 50s in Hungary or in Czechoslovakia. And because they don't send in the army, Communism collapses in Eastern Europe. Country after country, communism collapses. Poland, East Germany, the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, there is a playwright, Václav Havel, who becomes a symbol of the movement and would later on be elected to positions. And country after country. In Romania, the communist leader of Romania, Ceausescu, tries to use the army to repress people, but the people are not going to stand for it. They overthrow him and he's going to be killed. Country after country in the Eastern Bloc, it collapses until eventually it gets back to Russia. And in Russia, it's going to collapse there too. Now, in all these places, this spread in Europe, and because the USSR doesn't stomp on them, and because the governments don't send in the armies, before you know it, Europe, communism collapses. Now, this is important because in China, the government of China was also communist. Well, this whole concept of let's protest, let's have freedom, comes to China. Chinese students occupy Tiananmen Square. Now, if you look at the pictures here, there's a picture of Mao Zedong, and in front of it is a statue, symbols liberty, kind of like the Statue of Liberty. It symbolizes liberty and democracy. And look at the next picture, the square with all those students and people. They want freedom too. And you get a whiff of freedom, it becomes an toxic, overpowering thing. But the Chinese Communist government decided, no, we are not going to let go. And if you look at the picture there, they sent the army in. Now, the picture on the bottom, there's a clip I want you to also see. It's on the classroom. And this right here is really remarkable. It's a lone Chinese guy with two bags in his hands standing in front of a row of Chinese tanks, basically pleading with them, how can you come into our government? How can the people's army, do this to us? Think of the bravery of that guy standing in front of a tank. Because if you look at the other picture on the far left, eventually the tanks and armored personnel carriers and army did get through. And when they got in the square, they would kill people. They would run through. They crushed this thing. And those student leaders that they could get a hold of would be arrested, and others would have to flee. There's a link on the classroom from the news of that time where a reporter talks about the downlash. Now, communism today is still, the Communist Party still runs China. The people do not elect the leadership. The leadership is elected or selected by the Communist Party. Okay, so Xi is a communist leader, and it's not democracy. So democracy works in Western Europe, but that's not necessarily in China. Now, so as we look at this, there's a couple things I do want you to take away. The USSR collapses. Today we talk about Russia. Russia always was the heart of the USSR, but all of those parts of the USSR, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, all of those countries, Estonia, they become their own freedom. They want to be free, and when the USSR collapses, they all get their freedom. Now, it's been a rocky road for them, and some countries more than others have had problems. And lately, you've had Russia taking parts of the Ukraine back, like the Crimea. Now, today, Russia is not controlled by the communists. But you have a leader in Russia today, under Vladimir Putin, who is very authoritative. And if you've been watching the news lately, you see where quietly Putin has been extending and extending and extending, where he's been in power a long time, and now basically he's solidified his role as a leader of Russia for the foreseeable future. So all that democracy that was kind of promised to the people, in the end, didn't necessarily get there. And if you look at China, the Chinese government still controls the country of China. Hong Kong, which was given back to China by Great Britain at the end of the 90s, was allowed some democracy. But if you've been watching the news last fall and this winter, there's been a lot of protests there where the people are worried about losing the democracy that they do have. So we don't have a Cold War today, but there's still a lot of tensions between us and Russia, us and China. If you want to see that, just go to the news and type in the Spratly Island, because the Chinese have claimed islands that they might not have a claim to. And when the United States sends warships near there to dispute that, there's a lot of conflict. And then there's been a lot of talk about Russia and Putin getting involved in American elections. So the Cold War is over, but there's still a lot of tension left in the world.